And often what we want, to be honest, is we want to be like, if you think of two different kinds of airplanes, we so wish when it comes to changes in our life that we could be like a Harrier jump jet, that we could go from our current reality to where we'd like to be in like a, in a jump, and to be kind of catapulted, I suppose, into our new state. But the problem is that it doesn't work like that, because for change to be lasting, we need to rewire our brain. And our brain likes things the way they are. It likes autopilot. And so it takes very intentional effort to form new neural pathways and new habits. So actually, a better approach is to be a little bit more like a jumbo jet taking off for a long haul flight. There's a whole lot of throttle initially, but it gradually starts going along that runway, and the runway, and it goes on and on and on. And you kind of think, oh my goodness, we're going to run out of runway. And then eventually it takes off.
Do you want to wake up feeling like you're stepping into who you're meant to be, into the best possible version of you? What if I told you that the key to your best life, health, and happiness are all around you? You just have to find what works for you. I'm Hope Pedraza, and I believe that there isn't just one way to live a healthy and meaningful life, and that all you need is a little inspiration to make changes that last from the inside out. Each week, I'll be sharing tangible tips and inspirational interviews to help you on your journey. These are the steps to take to improve your life and live with purpose. This is Hopeful and Wholesome. Hey y'all, welcome back to the show. Today I have on the show Allison Liu, and she is a brain health coach and expert in helping women to reclaim their mental sharpness and improve their energy and mood. She struggled with brain fog and panic attacks in her early 50s and forgetting what she was saying in the middle of saying it, finding it hard to express herself, and just feeling increasingly irritable. She felt like she was totally losing herself. Adopting a science-based approach, which she uses with her clients today, she increased her own, what she calls brain reserve, improving her memory, mood, and relationships. And now she coaches women in their 40s and beyond to achieve the same so that they can handle life's challenges with confidence, with ease, and fully engage in life at work, at home, wherever they are. And we are talking all about brain health today and what we can do. She talks about that brain reserve, and we talk about what we can do to help kind of increase that brain reserve, what it looks like to help our brain as we age, and what it looks like to what we're doing right now that can be kind of challenging our brain reserve, and what we can do to really live life to the fullest by building the healthiest brain we possibly can. And it might not be all of the things that you think. So I love this episode talking about staying sharp for life. Let's jump in. All right, y'all, let's jump in. I'm here with Allison. We're talking about your brain health today. And I love this because we haven't had this conversation on the show. So thanks so much for joining me today, Allison.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me. What a wonderful opportunity to share stuff about looking ways to look after your brain, which is something I'm really passionate about. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. And it's so important. I think it's, I had a conversation yesterday with a podcast I was doing an interview on, and we were talking about the things we don't have to think about because we don't see them. And I think our brain is one of those. And, we hear brain health, this and that. But I feel like a lot of times we forget about it because looking at our brain, we don't see it. We're not seeing like the, aesthetic results from doing things to help our brain. So I think oftentimes we forget about it. And so can you I would love to get just kind of the backstory and just kind of get your story and your background and how you got into this space and just where all of your insight comes from.
So to be honest, I was very much like you. When I was younger, I never really thought about my brain. We hear about ways to look after our joints or our heart, and especially our skin, but not so much about our brain. So my personal journey really only started about 10 years ago when I was kind of going through the perimenopause, and I started to notice some changes in my own mental health that were really quite unnerving. And I found that I was making impulsive decisions that actually were at times kind of really worryingly dangerous. And afterwards, I'd be really shaken up and think, my goodness, how can I ever stop myself from making such impulsive decisions like that again? I was becoming increasingly anxious and irritable, which was really unlike me. So normally I'm really quite positive and energetic and quite relaxed and gentle. But I was starting to have panic attacks and would lose my temper over like really small things. And my husband, of course, was starting to notice these things and was kind of like really a bit confused about what was going on. yeah, and he didn't know how to help me either. So I was really worried what people would be thinking of me at work, because literally I could be right in the middle of talking about something and I forget what I was saying. And sometimes I'd struggle to put my thoughts together or to express myself. And at times I'd have no recollection of certain meetings or decisions that had been made. And I was honestly worried that my capability would start to be questioned.
Yeah.
It's a horrible feeling. I was a manager, still am. And, I'm employed to kind of bring in results, to manage people. I'm really capable in my job. And so at that time, though, I was really starting to struggle. So I felt like I was losing my sense of self. It was kind of a real brain fog that I was in. And I didn't recognize how I was behaving. And, I wasn't able to control any of what I've just explained either. It wasn't like I could tell myself to not make impulsive decisions or to remember what I couldn't recall. And I think that's why it was so frightening, because I couldn't control what was happening to me. And kind of around about that time, I started to be interested in natural ways to heal the body. I had been on medications earlier in my life, and they'd had side effects that really weren't great. And so I was kind of like, okay, I want to know and learn things that I can do for myself to help my own health. And so I started to learn about stuff and to experiment with things to see if they would make me better or worse. So I was really experimenting with stuff. But what happened actually was amazing. And after a while, I'd look in the mirror and think, God, my skin looks brighter, and my digestion started to improve. It had always been like really sluggish all my life, but it was starting to get so much better. Amazingly, the brain fog started to lift. And I can't tell you how amazing it was just to be able to think more clearly again. And it makes you just realize, it made me realize even more where I'd actually come from in terms of that brain fog. And so over time, my mood started to improve and the panic attacks completely stopped.
Oh, wow.
And so I now feel like I'm back to solving problems really quickly at work, adding real value. I'm genuinely happier. There are obviously things that come along in life that there are for everybody, but I feel like I'm better able to cope with them and deal with them now.
Yeah.
And, it really has affected my relationships as well with those closest to me. So I then was fascinated by what I was learning, and I was thinking, why don't we know these things, Because I was feeling so much better from it. I wanted a way to be able to share what I was learning with other people. So I trained as a health coach, and then I did some further training as a brain health coach, because it had had such an impact on me when my brain was functioning so much better that it was just that area that really interested me. So that's how I have come to where I am now. And that's why I'm so passionate as well about the brain. It makes us who we are.
Yeah.
And yet, like you say, we're more likely to spend money and time looking after our skin than we do our brain, because we can see it and we can't see the brain.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, it's so true. So when you were going through your kind of holistic process with yourself, healing process, what did that look like? Were you doing certain dietary changes? Was it certain supplements? What did that look like for you?
Yeah. I think when it comes to anything to do with our body is like a system. And so there can be multiple things that aren't really quite right. It's not always just one thing. If we just did this one thing, we'd be able to fix ourselves. That would be so simple, wouldn't it?
If only.
But yes, exactly. But, it's actually taking that multiple approach and also realizing what my own body needed and listening to my body in terms of, was something making me feel better or was it making me feel worse? Right. And so there is lots of different things that can affect how our brain functions and how well we feel. Definitely food is a really important part of that. I did actually personally have food sensitivities that I was unaware of. I really was totally unaware. And I decided one Easter for the period of Lent that I would give up certain foods for that period of time. And, I felt so awful at the time that I'd have tried anything, but I found it so hard. I was like, I can't believe that I'm not going to eat pizza for 6 weeks, But, I did it. And it was literally during that time, I was only about 2 or 3 weeks into it. And that was when the brain fog lifted for me. And, it can be different things for different people.
Right.
I'm not saying that, again, that's the one thing.
Right.
But for me, that actually had a profound effect on my health. And I was completely unaware, actually, that I had an intolerance to certain foods.
Yeah. What were some of those foods for you that you found you had intolerances to?
Definitely gluten and dairy. Interestingly, I've tried since. So I felt so good after this 6 weeks, by the way, that I was kind of like, oh, I'm not going to go back.
Right.
And, I was like, okay, so I've had gluten and dairy for 50 plus years, I'm fine. I'll now move on. And then one summer we were traveling and I just wasn't eating enough on the journey. How it was a struggle to find the right kind of things to eat. And so I thought, well, I'll just have some bread. And so I kind of ended up having it for a few days because I was like, oh, I think I'm fine. Do you know, some of the symptoms came back again?
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, no, I feel so much better without it that it's not worth it. Even though I love bread, and I love pizza. Yeah. It's not worth how it's making me feel.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of a key point for a lot of people because when I'm helping my clients with the dietary part of things, it is like they can't wrap their head around like, oh, I can't, for me, I had kind of this 90-day window where they're doing this anti-inflammatory diet. And it's like so hard to fathom, like, I can't eat, dairy or whether it's, sugar or whatever it is, gluten. But then that's the thing, right? When you realize how good you feel without it, you're like, because they're like, and I always tell them like, we can start implementing things back in after and kind of see how your body does. And a lot of them are like you, where it's like, well, why would I go back? Like, I feel so good now. And it's, I'm understanding now what it's doing to my body. And maybe my body doesn't tolerate it, as well. Or maybe years down the road, I'll try it again and then see if, it's just, but you realize a lot of times you don't realize how bad you feel until you realize how good you feel. It's exactly. One of those things.
Yeah, definitely.
So what other things, I know it's not just one thing, right? When you're going through your journey, what other things were you doing? Were there like self-care practices that you implemented? Was there any sort of like detox? What other things did you implement when you were going through your kind of healing process?
Yeah. So I had also been really overweight. So I had a BMI of just under 26, so classified as overweight. And I'm only about 5'4". I was wearing, in the UK, we have size 16 clothes. So, I was too big. To definitely. And I'd never been able to lose weight. And I had also got a solid ovarian cyst. I was diagnosed with a cyst. And unbeknown to me, really, that kind of, all the doctors were kind of really nervous about this cyst because, could it be malignant? Right. And so I was doing lots of research again, what are the things that I can do? And I came across the World Health Organization website had an article. And basically it said, if you want to reduce your risk of like all female cancers, so breast cancer, ovarian cancer, uterine cancer, then you need to not have fat around the middle. Right. And of course I was overweight at the time. And so it took me a good few readings of this article. And then I was like, okay, I need to try to do something about this. Yeah. And so I'm very logical. So took a logical approach with it all and set myself up. And I never even had an end goal in terms of how much weight I wanted to lose. Because I'd never been able to successfully do it. Right. I was like, I'm just going to start and have a go. Yeah. And I set myself the goal of 2 pounds every 3 weeks. Okay. So it's about 1.5 pounds a week. Yeah. And basically, I was very, very gradually losing the weight. And it was when I got to below a certain weight and I was kind of like, oh my goodness, this is working.
It's working.
That's right. This is working.
Yeah.
And I got to the stage so this started in the January. I got to the stage by the summer where all of my summer clothes didn't fit me, literally. So I had to kind of get a whole new wardrobe of summer clothes. And
it's a nice problem to have.
It was a nice problem. Then I kind of carried on and it's still at exactly the same rate. Yeah. And I was doing this combination of exercise and managing how I was eating. And then it got to about the November and I was kind of like, okay, now I'm BMI 22 BMI. Wow. And I'm like, okay, so this now is a better weight to be at. And I managed then in the year after that to really just stabilize it at that level. And I'm still that weight now. And that's probably, again, at least 7 to 10 years ago. I can't
that's amazing. You've kept it up
exactly. And I think it was just that I did it very gradually. Right. I didn't treat it like a diet. Yeah. I treated it more as I really want this to be a new way.
It's a transformation.
That's right. Of being and eating and so that really was, again, quite a significant thing for me as well, just the food side of things.
Well, and I think you did it the right way. I was having a conversation with one of my clients earlier. She's, goes through these periods where she gets frustrated with, the timeline of things, right? Things aren't happening as fast and similar. She's part of hers. And I don't, weight loss isn't always a thing, but sometimes that's just what needs to happen to kind of help things balance out. Right. And so some of my clients, they do want to lose some weight because they're dealing with estrogen dominance or whatever. And so similar thing with her. And she's slowly but surely implementing things. And so we were just kind of talking about that where she's, now she's kind of cleaned out some of her self-care products and she's kind of, working on toxicity and stuff. And so she's like, I feel like I got the diet piece down. That took a little while. And I got to where I'm in a groove with like the supplements that she's working with. And now, so it's like one thing at a time. But the point is, I think that slow, gradual, step by step, that's what it takes to make it work. And I think people really underestimate the power of just going slow. Like, I know we want it and we want it yesterday, but it just doesn't work like that when we're trying to make sustainable changes. And she, like for you, you've kept it off for, a decade. So being able to make changes that are going to last. And like you were saying, it's not just the quick fix. Like this is like my new way of life. This is like the new me. Like then, who cares if it takes, that long? It's a new version of you. So the slow and steady process is always the one that works the best.
It is. And the reason why is that our brain is used to things the way things are. And often what we want, to be honest, is we want to be like, if you think of two different kinds of airplanes, we so wish when it comes to changes in our life that we could be like a Harrier jump jet, that we could go from our current reality to where we'd like to be in like a, in a jump. And to be kind of catapulted, I suppose, into our new state.
Right.
But the problem is that it doesn't work like that because for change to be lasting, we need to rewire our brain. And our brain likes things the way they are. It likes autopilot. And so it takes very intentional effort to form new neural pathways and new habits. So actually a better approach is to be a little bit more like a jumbo jet taking off, for a long haul flight. There's a whole lot of throttle initially, but it gradually starts going along that runway, and the runway, and it goes on and on and on. And you kind of think, oh my goodness, we're going to run out of runway. And then eventually it takes off. But the thing is that it then goes for the long haul.
Right.
And because we've had that gradual change of habit over time and it's reinforced, that becomes the new norm. And it actually is the way that helps us to be more successful. And you see, the thing that people can really struggle with is that, when people try quick fixes and then they go back to the same habits, it kind of makes people lose heart.
Right.
And then they kind of get stuck where they are because they lose hope that they can never make it change.
Yep.
And then they're kind of like, well, okay, so I'm overweight. I'll just have to get used to it and resign myself to it.
Right.
But actually, we don't need to. If we do exactly like you say, these small changes and we keep going, they will become the new norm.
Mm-hmm. That's it. Yeah. Speaking of neural pathways, when we're looking at, so for those who are looking to maybe I've forgotten about my brain health. Like maybe this is something I need to focus on now. When we're talking about brain health, you talk about this concept of brain reserve. So can you speak to what that is and what we can do to enhance or build our brain reserve?
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to mental health, there is a physical element to it. And our brain is an organ and it has needs that must be met in order to function optimally. And so if you can imagine brain reserve being like a tank of fuel, the more fuel you have in the tank, the less vulnerable you are to running out should something unexpected happen. So you can go on a long journey, not worry about if you need to take a detour. However, if you get low on fuel and it goes into that red zone, then you know that you're more vulnerable should something unexpected happen. And it's the same kind of thing with brain reserve. The more active we are, the more we look after our brain, the greater the reserve that we have. And it means the more resilient we are when things come along. It means that our brain is just stronger to be able to cope with things that come their way. And so when we have mental health or memory issues, it's like an indication that that brain reserve has gone below the line. And there are all these things that we can do and that bring it back above the line again. It's very empowering to know that there's things that we can do. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And what are some of those things we can do to help build that brain reserve?
Yeah. So there are 11 factors that can lower or impact on the health of our brain. Would you like me to go through them? I'll try to do it as quickly as possible because there are 11.
Yeah, let's do it.
But it's really helpful to understand these. So we use a mnemonic called Bright Minds for the 11 risk factors that can harm the brain. So the first one is blood flow. Our brain is only about 2% of the weight of our body, but it takes 20% of the blood flow and oxygen and 20 to 30% of the body's glucose. And so it's incredibly energy hungry. And so it really needs the oxygen and nutrients and energy as much as we can optimally give it. And so when we have things like high blood pressure or sleep apnea or anything that interferes with our body's ability to provide oxygen to the brain, then it starts to struggle. So we really want to make sure to look after our blood vessels, look after our heart. Then that involves things like exercise and eating again in a way that doesn't raise cholesterol and all of those kind of things. So blood flow is super important. Retirement and aging, which is basically the brain is like a muscle and we just need to work it just in the same way as you work muscles, because if you don't use it, you lose it. And so, doing various kind of mental exercises that exercise different parts of the brain. And even there are some physical exercises that we can do that exercise different parts of the brain. So keeping learning as well as doing mental exercises. Inflammation. When we have chronic inflammation, it doesn't just affect our joints or our gut or, our skin with eczema. It also affects the brain. And so looking at ways to reduce the causes of chronic inflammation, what's causing the immune system to go into overdrive, as well as making sure that our body is having is not a strong pro-inflammatory environment. Right. So we want to make sure to have lots of anti-inflammatory foods that kind of dampen down that inflammation. Okay, so it's I is for inflammation. G is for genetics. And, I'm sure that you likely have said this for your listeners before that, when it comes to genes, they only load the gun, but it's actually how we live and our environment and our diet that actually pull the trigger. Right. And so Some people might have genes that can increase their risk for certain things like bipolar disorder or ADHD or memory loss as they age. However, there are things that we can actually do to help to prevent or reduce the impact of those things. So that's genetics. Head trauma. Head trauma is actually, there's a lot of people who are struggling with mental health issues that can actually have their root in head trauma. So the brain is actually very soft. It's like the consistency of soft butter. And you know how when you see brains on television, they've been soaked in formaldehyde or what have you, and they kind of look rubbery, They're not like that. They're very soft. And yet they're housed in a really hard skull with sharp, razor sharp, bony ridges in certain places. But the brain floats inside the skull in cerebrospinal fluid. So it moves inside the skull. And so when we have a head injury, what can happen is that the brain shunts inside the skull and ricochets. So, wearing a helmet is really, really good and really important because it protects the skull. However, what it can't do is it can't stop the brain from moving inside the skull.
Right.
And so really doing what we can to prevent kind of unnecessary head injuries. My brother-in-law's a farmer and he's now kind of 75 and he's had kind of some mini strokes. And, but he still does gardening, what have you. Well, my sister found him up a ladder against a tree and there he is kind of waving around a chainsaw, kind of chop this tree down. And you kind of think, maybe it's time to get somebody else to do those kind of things. It's making intentional decisions that say, maybe this is not such a bad thing. So that's head injury. Toxins. You mentioned that earlier, the whole thing of the products that we put on our skin or inhale or ingest. They reckon actually that women can put up to 500 chemicals on their skin every day.
Yep.
Which is a shocking number.
It's crazy.
Isn't it? I suppose when you think of all the products that a woman could put on her skin during the day, do you want to have a go at just listing some of them?
Yeah, no, I know. Well, you think about it, and that was the conversation I had with my client. You think of, the moisturizers and the makeup and the lotions and the bath wash, whatever you use in the bath or the shower, and your soaps and your cleansers. And there's, you name it.
Yeah, you see in each one of those, when you look at the bottles,
so many ingredients.
Loads and loads of ingredients. And so actually it's not hard to achieve that number at all. And yet our bodies have to kind of cope with detoxing all of that because what goes on your skin goes into your body.
Right.
And so your liver and your kidneys are having to work really hard to try to process all of those toxins and get them back out of your body again. And the same goes with pesticides on food and inhaling things. So all of those things can impact on the brain, especially if we're not detoxing properly.
Right.
Even things like deodorants that can contain aluminium.
Yep.
And all kinds of stuff. Lipsticks can contain lead. And lead is a neurotoxin. And so we just need to make wise decisions about what we put on our skin or, the kind of products that we buy. If it's good for the environment, it's more likely to be better for our health.
Right, for sure.
So that's toxins. M is for mental health, because actually mental health can be really quite damaging to our health. Mental health affects our physical health as well as physical health affecting our mental health. And so it can be really quite potent. And so making sure that to not be in chronically stressful situations, what can we do to lower those stresses that we have in our life? And how can we look after ourselves better? It's mental health. And then immunity and infections. So if anybody's ever had like Lyme disease or long COVID, the impact that a virus can have on the brain.
Yep.
So doing whatever we can to really look after our immune system, keep it in tip-top shape, making sure that we have enough vitamin D, and looking after our microbiome, because again, that's, 70% of our immune system is actually with our microbiome. So doing all those things so that should we ever get exposed to a virus, our body is in a really good position to be able to fight it and deal with it, so it doesn't linger and have that kind of effect. And all neurohormone deficiencies, hormones are chemicals in the body, and there are about 5 or 6 of them that have particular impact on our brain. And so making sure that those hormones are at optimal levels. And that can be a real challenge, especially as women go through the menopause, when estrogen and progesterone kind of drop, and the things that we can then do to look after our hormones, especially at that time of life. But as well, there are a lot of women, I had this myself, where premenstrual tension or have you, it was a roller coaster every month. And, so trying to, again, manage weight, when we're carrying excess weight on our tummies, it becomes metabolically active. And so it starts generating more estrogen in the body. And so it puts our body into what was called estrogen dominance. So just having too much estrogen going on in the body. And that can make us really irritable and, all of that horrible stuff that we go through with PMS. So looking after hormones, and then diabetes and obesity is the D. Again, just really trying to stabilize our blood sugar levels. It's sugar that makes us gain weight, not fat. And, it kind of can put us on like a roller coaster during the day of peaks and crashes, and causes, cravings and anxiety. And, we think of it as such a positive thing because, of course, it tastes so nice. But actually, of all of these risk factors, it can impact on several of them. So, it hardens arteries, raises cholesterol, upsets your hormone balance, so it's impacting on several of them. So it's one thing that I would say, for your listeners, if you're able to kind of get blood sugar under control, you'll impact actually on lots of different ways that you can benefit your brain. So diabetes and obesity. And then the final one is sleep. Sleep is important. It's when we're asleep, our brain gets a wash. And isn't that fascinating? So basically the cerebrospinal fluid just kind of washes through the brain to take away any like cellular debris, dead cells from the day, any toxins that have accumulated during the day, and it gets this lovely wash. But it only happens when we're asleep. And so if we're not getting sleep for long enough, or good quality sleep, or, struggling with sleep full stop, then our brain isn't getting that wash that it needs. And things can start to build up. And again, that would contribute to brain fog and memory loss and that kind of thing. So really doing things to help with sleep. There's one tip that I have with sleep that I would love to just share with your listeners.
Yeah.
And that is that a good night's sleep actually starts at the start of the day, because what we need to do is get outside in good quality daylight first thing in the morning, and for about 20 minutes. And what that does, as the daylight hits the retina in our eyes, it signals to the body that we're awake now, and it switches the body from melatonin producing to being cortisol producing instead. So it completely switches that night-day cycle, tells your body now this is daytime. And then about 13 hours later, your body will then start switching back to the nighttime, so producing melatonin and reducing the cortisol. And, there was a period of time where I wasn't sleeping so great. I mean, it wasn't like it was really bad, but I was kind of like, I know what I need to do. I need to get out in the morning. And so I started doing that every morning. Every morning I get out. It doesn't matter if it's raining or really cold. I now go out for my 20 minutes first thing in the morning. And, my sleep is so much better.
That's awesome.
Really had a profound effect. So yeah, sleep is the final one.
Yeah. Those are so good. All of that, I find, I think a lot of us know all of those things. But again, I think it goes back to what we were saying at the beginning is we don't always equate it to brain health. We're like, well, we know they're good for us. We don't always equate it to brain health. And so I like that you went through all of those and that all of those are such good, tangible things that we can really hone in on for brain health too.
Yeah.
What do you find do you have any, if you had to list out a few of the things that we're doing that hurt our brains the most, what would you say is the things that we're doing that's the most detrimental to our brain health?
I would honestly say sugar. I think diabetes increases the risk of Alzheimer's disease by 50 to 60%. That's a really tough statistic to have to say to people.
Yeah.
We know that of the people who have diabetes, about 70% will go on to get Alzheimer's disease in comparison with 10% of the general population. And that's a really sobering statistic. We know that somebody could be at risk of losing their sight or could be at risk of, losing a limb because that can happen with diabetes. But I think most people are not aware that it can lead to Alzheimer's. And if we can just get control of the amount of sugar that we are eating, and as well, that comes down to volume. It's not saying never have sugar. Right. In the UK, the National Health Service recommends that people have no more than 30 grams of added sugar a day. And actually, in comparison with other countries, we're really still quite high. Yeah. Some of them are, 25 grams, but we would say 30 grams of sugar a day. However, on the average Brit eats 100 grams of sugar a day. Oy. And in some other countries, again, that's higher still.
Oh, yeah.
And, you kind of think, how's that possible? And most people would kind of go, well, I don't need that much. But actually, it's all of those hidden sugars that we're not aware of. So one of the things that I would say to people is to just start looking, become a label reader. If you're buying things in a supermarket, take a look at the label. If there's ingredients that ends in O's, and what food manufacturers are doing is instead of having sugar as the main ingredient, they're calling it various different names.
Hidden names there.
Yeah, exactly. This kind of syrup, that kind of O's, maltose or dextrose or, and you can read on some labels, there's several of them, you take a healthy breakfast bar, you go and take a look, and actually you can have up to a quarter of your day's sugar allowance just in that one bar.
Oh my gosh.
Exactly. And so no wonder we're overeating things because we have no idea of how much sugar, it's in salad dressings and tomato ketchup and, it's all over the place. It's in loads of bread. You can hardly buy any bread without sugar. And yet if you make bread yourself,
it doesn't call for sugar. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. And so, read restaurant menus, things like that. If you're going to go out to the restaurant and you want a dessert, maybe share it with somebody.
Yeah, right.
Look for ways to kind of moderate and pull back that sugar would be one of the most important things I think I would say.
I mean, I think that's such an important thing to mention. And I mean, I think at least most of the listeners here, they're aware of how much sugar affects our health. But I think, if you really think, if we're specifically talking about brain health and we think about the number of people, and at least, I don't know statistics from other countries, but at least in the United States, the number of people dealing with mental neurodegenerative diseases, right? I mean, in the staggering number of here in the United States of people that have diabetes, I mean, it's an epidemic. And there's obviously a link there, right? I mean, you can't, I just think that we're really missing the mark on what's causing these increase of neurodegenerative disease and with the increased rates of diabetes. And like here, I live in Texas, and especially in South Texas, the diabetes rate is just like astronomical, like in this city specifically. And I think we're just kind of missing that piece of what it, I mean, obviously diabetes has long-term effects, but even past that, like there's other effects, like you're talking about Alzheimer's, like there's other effects of what happens to your brain with this whole sugar diabetes epidemic. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. And I think that's such a huge point. Yeah.
And I mean, you're right. Things like Alzheimer's and dementia massively on the increase. It's like, you can't look at the statistics. There's probably about 55 million people around the world right now with dementia. By 2050, which is actually not that long away, that's due to more than double to 139 million.
That's crazy.
And it's like, I'm not okay with those statistics.
Yeah.
I'm really not.
Yeah.
And especially when we know that at least 80% of disease is preventable.
Yeah, exactly.
It's down to what we do and how we live. It's like, hey, we can control this way more than we realize. And that's why I'm so passionate about what I'm doing, because I'm kind of like, I want to say to people, hey, you don't have to live in fear actually of getting dementia. If we take the steps that we need to take right now, and, just live in a way that's in harmony with our body and our brain, then actually we're preventing going down that road.
Yep.
Dementia, it takes decades. You can see the early signs of dementia in people maybe even in their 30s.
Oh, wow.
And so it takes decades for a dementia to progress in the brain. It's very slow. And so, we're never too young or too old to start taking care of our brain. Yeah. And the sooner we do it, the better.
It's true. Well, and I think another big piece that we kind of overlook with it, because you mentioned neuroinflammation, or you're talking about the hormones, but I find this true with a lot of my clients. There's a couple labs that I run that kind of have some markers for neuroinflammation. And I think that's another one too, is the toxicity. And you talked about toxins. I think we also underestimate really the long-term implications of that. Because again, a lot of times it's one of those things where sometimes we do see like the physical signs of toxicity, but we don't always see like the physical signs of toxicity, but it's what it's doing under the surface, right? And that neuroinflammation is such a big marker. And I find that a lot in some of the labs that I run. And, sometimes it has to do with gut pathogens and stuff, but a lot of times it's just overall toxicity in the body. And I think we really underestimate the long-term implications of exposing ourselves to so many toxins. And it's kind of like sugar, right? Where it's like, well, you can't avoid all toxins. Like, we live in, we're going to come into, contact with them, but it's just limiting your exposure to it and understanding that there are like potential long-term implications. Neuroinflammation is a real thing. And that's what's causing all of these degenerative diseases. That I just think that toxicity is another big one that we're just kind of underestimating.
Absolutely. And you're right. It's both limiting our exposure and again, knowing where those toxins are
coming from
and making conscious decisions to avoid them.
Right.
And then supporting as well our organs of detoxification to support our body in actually dealing with them. They reckon that about 80,000 chemicals have been introduced into our environment since the Industrial Revolution. That's a lot of chemicals.
That's a lot.
Exactly. And, pesticides are really powerful. They kill bugs. What's our microbiome? Well, our microbiome is bugs, and what's the difference between a human and a bug your size? They're not great for us. And so, if they have if it's a neurotoxin for a bug, it's actually the same for us as well. Yeah. So doing what we can to reduce that exposure, organic where possible. And, you've got your Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen lists that can be really helpful, especially if people can't afford to go, completely organic. Right. They'll give you a good indicator of the ones to make sure that you do.
Yeah. Good tips. As we start to wrap up here, do you have any final thoughts to share with the listeners on just any other thing that maybe we haven't talked about in terms of just protecting your brain health, or things to start doing to protect your brain health?
I honestly would say it's about being intentional about things that you do and the choices that you make. When you know that these things can influence on the health of your brain, and actually the brain is everything that you are. It's how you think and feel and act and react. It's the organ of your character, of your personality, of your intelligence, of your memories. It's everything. And so it's kind of really having a renewed respect for it and just kind of saying, okay, I might have been doing those things in the past, or I might have been enjoying doing them, but actually I'm going to make a different decision now for my brain and for my future. So yeah, I would say just being intentional.
Yeah, good advice. I love that. So I do have one more question I want to ask you as we wrap up. But before I ask you that, can you let everyone know where they can find out more about you, working with you, and what you're doing with your brain health coaching?
Yeah, absolutely. So firstly, I think I would say that if anybody is struggling with their mental health, then it's really important to seek help from a skilled mental health professional. But alongside that, they can also adopt healthier dietary and lifestyle habits just to build that brain reserve, like I was talking about earlier. So each person is going to have a different combination of those risk factors that I was going through. And so what I do when I work with clients is I'll just ask them to do a couple of assessments and in order to identify, okay, which risk factors particularly are applying to them. And then we work together to reduce or eliminate those risks. It's a very tailored approach because, like I say, we're all different, and the things that can cause problems one person can be different from another. So as a result of working with me, kind of women get ahead of their fear. And, you know, there's a lot of stigma around mental health issues as well as memory issues. And so it can be very isolating because people are hesitant to tell other people about what's going on because they worry that they'll let people down, or, you know, that other people will worry, or that people will think that they're not capable. So, you know, when they're working with me, it's kind of like I totally understand. It's a place where they can be open about what they're going through. And then I will empower them with tools, techniques, understanding that help them to move confidently into the future. So they'll be equipped with ways to optimize their health, their mental well-being, and not just manage the symptoms of disease. It's a really good way to kind of boost overall health, well-being, and happiness. So that's what I do. Yeah.
Awesome. And I'll have links to Allison's website and all the things in the show notes, so you can go check that out and check out what she's doing. The last question I want to ask you, Allison, that I like to ask everybody as we wrap up: what do you think is the most important thing you can do to live with purpose?
I would say it's got to be, in a sense, what I was sharing earlier, that thing of being intentional about your brain. So it kind of steers so many decisions that we make. You know, it steers things like self-care, about taking time to walk in nature, time for yourself, time to reflect, time to be and not just always rush. It's about taking time to play and, you know, spend time with those you love. And so, yeah, that's what I would say.
I love that. I love it. Thank you so much, Allison. Thanks for sharing all of this and for helping us just build a healthier brain as we age. All of this is so valuable. Thank you so much for sharing and for spending time with us.
Oh, you're very welcome. Hope I would just like to offer your listeners that if they would like to book just an initial chat with me, I'd like to offer some free coaching sessions for your listeners today. And I want to just make sure that anyone who wants to optimize their brain health has the opportunity to do so. So for 3 people, there's one free session. If they go onto my website and they just put in the code HAW for Hopeful and Wholesome 23, and then they can go ahead and book that 1 hour with me. And, you know, what if at the end of that, they feel like working with me is something that they'd like to do, but we can talk about that. But ultimately, I want to help them feel like they can make a step in the direction that they want to be going in. And, yeah.
I love that. Thank you so much for offering that. That's amazing.
Yeah,
so
you're very welcome.
Yeah, I'll put the promo code in the show notes too, so y'all can use that and get some coaching with Allison. Thank you so much, Allison.
You're very welcome. Hope it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much. You're providing an amazing resource with this podcast. I love what you're doing in empowering women to live life to their fullest. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Hopeful and Wholesome, y'all. If you found value in this week's episode, please subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts and leave a review to let me know what you thought. I love to know what you find useful in these episodes so I know how I can provide the most value I can to my listeners. And if you have topics that you want to know more about, I'd love to hear those as well. So shoot me a message on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn. It's @TheHopePedraza, or visit my website, hopefulandwholesome.com. Thanks, y'all.